Tonight, we're diving into something that I think every witch, healer, or empath has felt in some way at some time, and this is the witch wound. So, this is an inherited fear or shame that comes from centuries of persecution or silencing of people like us. So you may feel it through hesitation to share your practices or your views. You might sense it as fear of being judged by others around you, or that nagging voice inside that says, who am I to practice this kind of thing? So, in tonight's episode, we're going to explore where the witch comes from, including the historical roots, as well as how it can show up in our individual lives and what we can do to truly transform this wound and help us step into our greatest power. So, merry meet. I'm Aislin. This is Ask Aislin, and I'm here tonight talking about the witch wound. So, saying hello to those who are joining us live. Merry meet. Leave a heart or a thumbs up somewhere in the feed. This helps us get it out to more people. And if you are live, leave questions and comments, and we'll have a Q&A at the end. So we're going to dive in. We have a lot to talk about tonight. So as I said, we'll be talking about the roots of where the witch wound comes from. For you, those of you who this is the first time hearing about it, don't worry. We're going to explain exactly what it is. We'll also talk about the different archetypal ways that this energy could show up in your life. And you may relate to more than one of these different ways, or maybe one, only one. But nevertheless, we're going to have practices that you can use to help you heal this aspect of yourself. And when we begin to heal the witch wound, we begin to find the space to step into a greater version of ourselves as witches, healers, empaths, magical practitioners, whatever it is that you label yourself as. So I wanted to start by just making a connection here, why it's important, I think, to talk about the witch wound. It's important to talk about it at any time of the wheel, but especially now as we're entering Mabon season, we're on our way to Samhain season eventually. Autumn is a great time of the wheel for us to explore ancestral connections, also look at the historical roots of what we as a community practice. This is a good time for remembrance, so remembering those who have come before us. Also, this is a great time for shadow work. So within our shadow work, there may be an aspect of your shadow work that you can do in order to heal this individual wound for yourself. And by the way, when we do our shadow work and we begin to heal our individual wounds, we also begin to heal the collective wound. So what we do for ourselves also will benefit all of those who experience a similar type of wound. I wanted to also open up with a personal story of mine. Some of you may have heard this before. And this is just a story of kind of my first real experience outside of growing up, where I felt persecution and probably some fear as well around really being able to express who I was. So I grew up in Indiana and near many cornfields, and so in my town where I grew up, I don't know, I suppose there were a few witches, but nobody really talked about this. I dabbled in witchcraft. I kind of started reading the Celestine Prophecy and some Edgar Casey. And this was sort of my bridge into more esoteric studies and away from the Christianity that I was raised in. Eventually, I moved to Boston where I went to school, and I experienced so much culture that I had not experienced when living in Indiana. And this is also where I eventually found out that I was a witch and kind of it began to claim that power for my own. So I was very proud of this. I was living in Boston. I considered it a pretty open place for me to practice, certainly much more open than in Indiana. I remember one day I was wearing my pentacle. I was on Newbury Street. For anybody who knows Boston area, I was shopping. We had gone into an antique shop and was looking at some candle holders, maybe some goblets or something for potentially for a chalice. The woman who owned the store came up to me before I could say anything or even understand what was going on. She took her palm and she hit me in the forehead, and she began yelling, "Out, pagan, out." And so this was really my first sense of kind of being persecuted for being out in the open about my spirituality and what I practiced and what I believed. So others may have experienced similar situations, and this can lead to sort of an ingrained fear that can make it hard to then get past it and feel open and safe in all areas. So I definitely encourage you and welcome you to share your experiences in the chat with us, whether you're live or you're watching back in replay. We would love to hear any stories that you have where you have felt uncertain, fearful, or persecuted for being out in the open with your practices. So let us dive into the witch wound now. What is it? Where does it come from? And just pausing to say merry meet to a few who are here. I see Jamie is here, merry meet, and Kurt, and Andrea, and Tommy, and Cindy. Merry meet to everyone. Welcome. We're so happy that you guys are all here. And if you're also here, say hi. Let us know you're here in the chat. So the historical roots of the witch wound go back centuries and centuries to the witch trials of the 14th to 17th centuries. So there's a lot of disagreement about what actually happened during this time period, how many people were actually persecuted. At the very low estimate, we know at least 1 million people were. These were mostly women, but they could be anybody who was practicing wisecraft, practicing herbalism, midwifery, healers, shamans, mystics, all of these different people. In fact, even people who were practicing Chinese medicine or Ayurveda, which would be considered to be coming from like a pagan root, these people would also kind of find themselves rounded up in this mass persecution. At the high end, some estimates are 10 to 13 million people killed during these multiple centuries. These are mainly people who drew their power from the earth or found themselves as like the ancestors of others who had drawn their power from the earth. And there was also a suppression of women's voices. Now, this also coincides with changes in the male-dominated medical practice of the West. These changes and these sort of movements to gain and seek control over medicine, right? So prior to this, it would be very common for somebody to go to a village healer and receive help, whatever kind of help they needed. And when these changes began to take place, there was also a lot of religious practices in medicine that were not folk healing any longer, so more tied to Christianity and needing a priest in order to heal yourself, and then eventually this movement into only those who practiced a specific kind of Western medicine were actually lifted up as healers, right? The only ones that someone could go to legitimately and find legitimate healing. So over these many centuries that this is ongoing, there is great collective trauma that is building, right? And we know that there is such a thing as energetic inheritance and energetic transmission. So just like our family trauma that we can pick up from our own ancestors, like in our actual family lineage, we also are going to be prone to this collective trauma that is all around us in our own history. This can leave imprints in those of us who practice the old ways. So you may not even consciously understand it or consciously realize what's going on, but underneath it, unconsciously, you're also carrying this collective trauma because you're a human who's connected into the collective. Now, this can be passed on to us through epigenetics. It can also be passed on to us just through the collective stories and the collective fear, the collective silence, and the collective cultural messaging that is all around us at all times. Now, we do not need direct physical contact to someone who was persecuted in order to experience this. So I will venture to say that most of us experience this in some way, and sometimes in subtle ways, sometimes in more overt ways, and sometimes in ways that we don't even recognize. So there is a great psychological impact to this today, and we will see it in so many different areas, and you may relate to some of these or all of these. So you may experience this in your fear of being visible, your hesitation to share or speak your truth, your fear of rejection or ridicule or being different. So I often will posts in our Body Mind Witchcraft group to help get the group talking about different things, and also on our page. And one of the posts that I remember posting every once in a while is what is standing in your way of really stepping into your spirituality or stepping into your gifts or stepping into your power. And so sometimes people will talk about being visible, the fear of being ridiculed, the fear of being wrong, the fear of being shamed, the fear of being outed. And so when I see these responses from our communities, I know that, this is affecting us in great numbers. Now, other ways that the witch wound may play out in your life is through imposter syndrome. And any imposter syndrome feelings that you might have surrounding your spiritual gifts, surrounding your intuition, surrounding your right to be here as a witch or a pagan or a magical practitioner or whatever you choose to call yourself. You may see it play out in over explaining or justification. You may see it play out in hiding or staying small, even though you'd like to have a bigger presence somewhere. So one thing I kind of encourage you to reflect on here is, how does this energy play out in your life? So have you ever felt, here's a good reflection question for you, have you ever felt afraid to let others know about your spiritual practices, or worried about being judged for your intuition? So I'll say that again. Have you ever felt afraid to let others know about your spiritual practices, or worried about being judged for your intuition? So how does this witch wound show up in your everyday life? So we would love to hear from you. So put this in the chat, whether you're with us live, which really helps us with the feed. It gets out to more people if we have people engaging in the live, but also share with us later in replay, because we love to hear everyone's experiences. So let's talk about other ways and places and avenues that the witch wound may show up. So kind of think about it. Do you relate to any of these as I go through them? So in our relationships, the witch wound may show up as hiding our spiritual identity from our family, from our partners, from our friends. So let's pause for a moment and kind of talk about that. I know that I certainly can relate to this as someone who has a religious family. I grew up in a religious family. My brother is a fundamentalist Christian. My parents come from a more open-minded aspect of Christianity, but nevertheless, I have to suppress and hide this part of me for fear of being judged by my family. I don't exactly know what they would do if I were open about this. I know in the past when I was much younger and my parents found books, this is back when I was still living at home as a teenager, and my parents found some of my witchcraft books buried in the back of the closet. My mom freaked out. I have a tattoo on the back of my neck that in Mandarin says heaven. And this was a stage name of mine back in the very early days of me as a performer. And my mom became convinced it was the sign of the devil. And so these messages teach a person to suppress themselves. So even if we get over this later, lingering underneath in the unconscious is still that potential fear of being found out, of being ridiculed, of being judged, of even being harmed. I have a teacher of mine who sadly crossed through the veils several years ago, but he was an art history teacher I had back in when I was in music school. And he was a high druid priest. And no one, I would venture to say that probably no one at the school really knew that about him. But he shared this to me because I was wearing my pentacle in class one day. He realized, came up to me or pulled me aside after class that, oh, I realize you're one of us, right? And he eventually shared, we became closer over the years. He eventually shared with me a story. He was writing a book about Druidism. He was very high up in, in the Druidic communities. And he was waiting until his parents crossed through the veil so he could publish a book that he was writing about Druidism, because he was afraid of what would happen if they found out. So you could see, and this was a man like highly respected, he was in his probably 60s when I met him, and still feeling that fear or that need to hide. So, just to normalize this, if you are experiencing something like that, you are not alone. Now, other ways in our relationships that the witch wound could show up is through over apologizing or over explaining. So you may have hunches, you may have wisdom to share, you may have intuition, and rather than just being able to say that to somebody, you may apologize for it. Or you may over explain it, or you may kind of downplay where the information comes from, downplaying your own intuition. You may make yourself smaller so as not to be seen or heard in certain areas or with certain people. So again, thinking about how does this play out in your own life. So Cindy says she's definitely experienced this. She said being raised in a very Bible thumping family. She said, however, my grandmother was clairvoyant, my great grandmother was a shaman, and they are two of my guides. Right. And so many of us who feel drawn to this path, who have gifts, right, like this, may find that we have grandparents or people in our lineage who also had those gifts, and they may have suppressed them. So you may be surprised sometimes when you hear stories later about people in your lineage who it sounds like they were witches, or it sounds like they were magical or spiritual in some way, right, or intuitive or healers. But maybe the family didn't talk about it out in the open. And so Christopher Penczak writes a lot about the mighty dead. So these are our witch ancestors, and our witch ancestors can come from actual lineage, right? So like as Cindy is talking about her great grandmother and her grandmother and her great grandfather being a shaman, and them being guides of hers. So our deceased loved ones who also share those same gifts with us may then become our guides when they cross over. Joanna said shadow work has helped her greatly. She said, my family just thinks I've lost my faith. And that is a common thing that we will often hear from our loved ones, especially if we grew up in a Christian household, that she's just lost her faith, he's just lost her faith, or he's just lost his faith, they've just lost their faith, right? But the shadow work, as Joanne said, the shadow work can greatly help us, and we are going to talk a little bit more about that later. Kurt said when I first started, it was fairly common in this area, Colorado Springs, no reason to hide. And it's true, like there can be no reason to hide in certain places, but even in Los Angeles, where you would think there's no reason to hide, there are people persecuting witches here all the time. So I think it's important for us to, even if we feel that we don't have to hide, that's great. I hope that we all can get there someday, but it's probably not the experience for the vast majority of us. Again, I always celebrate when people are out in the open and very happy about it, and I hope that we all can get there someday, but it's important for us to acknowledge that this wound exists in most of us. Jamie said, since you asked for stories, she said, I've told this one before, but it's been a while. She said, I was raised in a Southern Baptist home. And my mom was strongly religious, she said, in a hateful way. I started my practice when I was 12, and while I am still not fully open about it, I never really worked to hide it either. So my mom was constantly at war with me over her spiritual beliefs to the point that she was abusive. And really that never changed much other than being an adult myself, and I'm not hurt as easily. So my mom found some of my witchcraft stuff and burned it. I definitely can relate to that. She said, I tried explaining that witches were synonymous with healers, midwives, etc. She lost it and went off on me about that, and in the same breath told me to take vitamins. Right? My response was to point out to her and shout in my best Old English accent, "Witchcraft, burn her." She didn't find that as hilarious as I did, but it did make a point. And then she says, I still feel this same fear of rejection and persecution 25 years later. And I don't believe it will ever go away, but thankfully I have plenty of people that I do know exactly, oh, that do know exactly what I believe and spiritually and accept me. Yeah. And so again, it is, even though we get past it, it may have happened like this, like Jamie, the story of me in that shop 25 some years ago, more than that, probably more like 30 years ago. It's still there, right? These are still our memories. It's still ingrained in our bones and our blood, and it's ingrained in our ancestral lineage. And so we carry it. So even if we get over it and we step into our power, most of the time we feel like we're there, right? Because we've done a lot of work around those issues. There still may be something unconscious in us that still, like Jamie says, she kind of believes it will always be there. It just may never really go away. Other ways that the witch wound can show up is in our spiritual practice. So outside of like our relationships with other people, in our spiritual practice, it may show up as avoiding ritual or magic because of guilt, fear, or inner doubt. So when people first come to the craft, especially from a pretty religious Christian background, people may have this sort of like, I take a step forward and then I take a step back relationship with the craft. So I know, I mean, this is going back 30 years ago. But I remember that same feeling of really being pulled to this, and at the same time being afraid of this because my growing up taught me that this was the devil's work, taught me that this was bad, that we were going to hell, those of us who practiced witchcraft, right? And so I've always said Edgar Cayce was like my bridge to this work because he was a Christian writer. He was writing about auras and past lives and all kinds of things like that. So it was kind of an easy bridge for me to make and eventually get here. But I felt that guilt and that fear, and feel so happy doing my rituals or doing practices that I was learning about at that very young age, and then all of a sudden I would get scared about it, or I'd have to hide it, or I would doubt myself, or I'd fear something bad was going to happen. So your guilt, your fear, your inner doubt can show up in many different ways, even decades later. Feeling disconnected from your own power. So obviously, if we're afraid of our magic, or afraid of being seen or out or whatever it is, out in the open, there may be this unconscious suppression of our own power. So eventually, we want to, through our shadow work, find ways to get past the collective wound, work through it, and also work through our own individual wounds. We may also find this in our self-expression. So the way that we talk about what we do, or the way that we talk about our identities, right? There's can be hesitation around calling yourself a witch, a healer, a psychic, a mystic, etc. So there are bad connotations in society around the word witch. So think about all of these views, what witches look like. I had a employer who for years she would talk about if there was a woman that she didn't like, she would call her a witch, right? And so the language is very powerful and it creates conscious and unconscious feelings inside of us. So if we are hearing people use the term in a derogatory way, then in some way, that may affect us as well. We may have hesitation using those same labels around us, and while I do think this is getting better, I still see terrible connotations of witches. So people sharing ghastly Halloween-looking witches and asking questions about witchcraft isn't really helping us to ease and fix that stereotype, right? Witches look like me and like you, not like some ghastly creature, right? So other ways that this can affect our self-expression, feeling like you need permission to do what you're doing, permission to claim your power, permission to claim your path. So let's think about some examples of how this might play out for people. So, and here's just some of the things that I know I've done, which are part of my own witch wound. So, kind of figuring out hiding my altars. So I did this more when I was younger, especially when parents were visiting or other people who I knew I wasn't certain would be receptive to what I was doing. I would hide my altars. So even in the house where I am right now, the main altars are back in the back of the house, not right up in the front where everybody coming through the door can see them. So though this is my house and I own it, and so so I have witchier touches out there, but there's still, I have a very Christian family, and this is something I have to always think about. Not wearing the pentacle in certain settings. So this is something even in Los Angeles. I have seen people look at that and judge me for it. And so I sometimes think about there's great pain in some of this too. So I think when we negate this and say like there's no reason to talk about this, or this is, or like everybody it doesn't really exist anymore. What we do is we suppress people's pain. Like this, to me, it's very painful to have to worry about whether or not I can wear the symbol of my spirituality and my religion out in public, even here in Los Angeles. It's very painful to me because it's a part of my identity. It's very painful to me that I have family who will not accept this part of me, or I have to fear that they will not accept it. I think to myself, if it was a cross instead, would I be afraid to wear my cross in public? Probably not in the same way I'd be afraid to wear my pentacle. So I actually have a second pentacle that is much smaller than this one and more subtle. And it's the one that I will sometimes wear. But I've seen myself in certain situations, like let's say I go into a bank and I don't want there to be any judgment against me that could affect the way that somebody is going to treat me in that setting. I may take the pentacle and move it behind and tuck it into my shirt or things like that. I'm not happy about this at all, but the fact is there are people that are going to judge us even in a city like Los Angeles. So other examples of how this could play out, and ones that I certainly have experienced, is the hesitation of starting my business. Took me years to start this business because I didn't know how to do it, how to be public in this way, when I had a family that I had to be closeted in the broom closet about, or with, around. Hiding my identity in my muggle job. So again, if I was Christian, would I be hiding my identity there? Probably not. But many of the clients were Christian or came from Catholic schools. And so I worried about especially how the parents would perceive me as I was teaching children at the time. Dismissing intuition is just imagination. So this can be something that gets in the way of a lot of witches. Really just discounting your gifts. So it's just in my head, asking questions like, am I crazy? When I'm having spiritual experiences, when I'm connecting to deity. I hear this all the time from people in our Body Mind Witchcraft group, and also in our Shadow Seekers membership, even in our coven. And also another way that I have seen this play out in my own life is hiding in business groups. So I have joined a lot of business groups to help grow my business. And I find myself sometimes hiding in those groups, or hiding what I do when people say, what do you do? Sometimes the first thing that will come out of my mouth is that I run a yoga and a meditation and breath work membership. And while there is a component of the membership, which is yoga, meditation, and breath work, it's just a small fraction of what we actually do. And but yet this is a gut kind of response that I have, especially in those groups when I don't know who those people are, what their religion is, and whether or not they will judge me. And I need help from some of these people. And I've noticed, like, there's a couple of pages that I follow where the head kind of business gurus are Christian, and they're very open and out about that. And so I worry, will I get the help that I need on my membership if they know that this is my religion and my spirituality? So these are just some of my experiences. So I'd love to hear about some of yours too. How does this play out in your life? So just going back to the chat, Tommy says, my mother was prejudiced against my beliefs. Yeah, so very common to hear parents, loved ones who are prejudiced against us, making us have to suppress who we are. Sam says, if someone objects to your path, ask them if they will abandon their faith for you, then ask how can they demand the same from you if they love you. The heart is master of all. We cannot abandon what the heart embraces. So very, very wise words, right? Andrea says, every time I tell someone I'm a witch, they warn me to be careful to not attract evil. Andrea says she wears her pentacle at work, but inside of her shirt. Yeah, so people are resonating with some of these experiences. Joanne said, after my parents passed, she said, I learned my mother was spiritual. Then when my husband, who's Roman Catholic, passed, I found myself and realized I had been questioning my Christian upbringing. Yeah, so sometimes it takes like those people in our lives who may have been more judgmental about our path. Once they cross through the veils, like my mentor, my teacher, then we find that we were questioning kind of all of that the whole time, right? Or suppressing something about ourselves. Jamie says, I admire you for your business because I have the same hesitation. She said, you're an inspiration. Thank you. I mean, it took me years to be able to do this, and years of trying to figure out how to do this. And a good friend of mine who is a reader, she did this reading for me, and she's like, you just have to start. Just open up the Facebook group and begin. And I literally went home like the next day because I was like kind of a trip out seeing her and somebody else. And the next day I opened the group. But it was hard. I was scared. It was years of me kind of hiding and playing small because I was just afraid of what would happen. Kurt said, did you choose your coven name to hide? Do you mean by Aislin? By Aislin? So the story of where my name Aislin comes from is that I was when I was very young, so like got to be about 20 or so when I'm first coming, kind of really stepping into my power as a witch, and I joined the Witch Fox, which sadly no longer exists. For those of you who know what Witch Fox is, it was like wonderful, 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 and it was just a way that we could connect and find in-person communities of witches. And I didn't know this was literally going to be like my first experience with witches and people who called themselves that and were on this path. And so I actually chose the name from a book. I spent a lot of time studying, witchcraft. It was the magical name that I had chosen. I feel it resonates very much with me. Aislin means dream and Lumina means light. And so I used this name in that group, and I met everybody in the group. I met them in person, and they were so wonderful. And I was Aislin for a while in that group, and then I tried to then introduce myself as my birth name, and by then everybody knew me as Aislin, and nobody would call me anything other than Aislin, and that's kind of where it all came from. And so today, I go by both names. I would say that probably more people know me as Aislin now in this world than know me by my birth name. But it is originally where it came from was as a method to hide, and but now I embrace it and I love the name. So great questions, and keep all of your experiences coming. We love to hear from you. So here's a reflection question for you. Where in your life do you notice yourself shrinking back or holding back or editing yourself so that you won't be judged? So where in your life do you notice yourself shrinking back, holding back, or editing yourself so that you won't be judged? So you can kind of think about those questions. You can think in your own reflection. You can share in the chat with us. Like always, I love to hear from you, and our other viewers love to hear from you, and especially about a topic like this where sometimes people feel very isolated or alone, or they feel like they're the only one feeling this way. It's just so good to hear from others. Okay, so let's talk about a few witch wound archetypes. And then I'm going to share a few other kind of signs in the body where the witch wound can kind of play itself out. And then we'll talk about what we can do, ways to heal this, both for ourselves and the collective. So there are three witch wound archetypes I want to talk about today. You may find that you resonate with one of these or all three of them or a combination or maybe none of them. And just because you don't relate to any of them doesn't mean that you are not experiencing the witch wound either. It can play itself out in different ways for different people. And the other thing, I will talk about this at the end, is if you find that this is a topic that you're really interested in, we go into topics like this in more detail in our Shadow Seekers membership. And so I'll talk about that a little bit at the end. We have a whole workshop on this very topic and with plans to do more work around it in the future. The first witch wound archetype is the silent witch. So the silent witch will keep their practice, as you might expect, completely private, completely silent, hesitating to use words like witch, finding it difficult to kind of name themselves or call themselves these words that they might be afraid that others will disapprove of. So afraid to use the words like witch or healer or psychic. They may edit themselves in certain conversations, posts, or even in ritual, even when in a private space, may find that they edit themselves because they're afraid of using these words or using this language or stepping too far into all of this. So the challenge for the silent witch is that silence feels safe, and it is, right? So we always think about these are ways that we adapt to the environment around us. So if we have found that it's unsafe to share, like my dear mentor, Henry, then we will silence ourselves, right? And then, like him, maybe only reach out when we see somebody who we're certain is going to be on the same wavelength as us. But the silent witch feels safe, through silence. But this also prevents connection. It can prevent learning. It can prevent being understood, right? And that's a goal of many of us, is understanding ourselves better. And when we silence aspects of ourselves, we don't allow them to be expressed, and we don't allow them to become understood, or understood to us and understood to others. Now, there may be a fear of persecution that's kind of underlying all of this. So the fear of judgment, the fear of ridicule, the fear of abandonment, that can be a big one. Like, are we afraid what would happen if everybody abandoned us because we actually stepped into who we are? All of this fear and this judgment and this suppression is going to override our self-expression. So it's going to begin to affect our throat chakra. And once that begins to be affected, we're going to affect our entire energetic system. And your energetic system is how you draw your energy, and you're able to send it out and charge things and work with yourself and heal yourself. And so you can see, once any one of the chakras is compromised, it's going to affect everything that requires energy to work. So I think that the key to healing for someone who identifies as the silent witch is to find small acts that feel safe. So small acts to voice yourself, or find visibility that feels safe. So this can be sharing a candle photo. And it might feel safe. Maybe it doesn't feel safe to come out and say, I did a spell for this or that reason. But here's a candle that I lit, and sending, in my intention to heal this thing, or whatever it is. And it might feel safe to just kind of edge in, that way. Say I pulled a card today. So, tarot and oracle cards are becoming more universally accepted around people. I think that maybe I think people are less afraid of them now than maybe they were 20 or 30 years ago. So it might feel safe to just say, I pulled a card. Like even my non-witchy friends have had readings done, or I've seen them with oracle decks. They may not consider themselves witchy at all, but they have an oracle deck. So it's just becoming more mainstream. So it can be a way for somebody who's kind of has that visibility wound and is the silent witch. It could be a way for you to feel safe as you also express yourself. Using language that begins to gently release and break some of that silence. So just subtle ways to change your language can help. And in maybe at first it's just small ways, but it starts to break through that silent wound. And so, one of the things, like with starting my business, was I really did a lot of shadow work around what would happen if I was found out. So to really go all in and feel like I could do what I had to do, I had to face that fear. Like, what if everybody found out? What if everybody in my family found out? What if people in my muggle job found out? I've done a lot of work to kind of like keep those people from knowing, but it is something in my shadow work that I have faced, and by facing it and working through it, it has helped me with this kind of silent visibility wound aspect of the main witch wound. Not easy work, and it's not something that necessarily is going to happen overnight for someone, but it's a step in the right direction. So another second archetype of the witch wound is the doubting witch. So the doubting witch is constantly second guessing their intuition, their clair senses, their right to be a witch, their right to call themselves a witch. They will downplay their magic or things around them as coincidence. So let's say they are dabbling in spell work as they're beginning, and they might not even be dabbling. Let's say they're very serious about their spell work, but still, they have this doubting witch aspect to them. And maybe it's they have some success in that spell work, but then there's that nagging thought in the back of the mind. It's like, oh, it was just coincidence that whatever your intention was actually came true. There may be worries about being good enough at being a witch, good enough to practice, worries that they may make mistakes. And honestly, this is a fear that I see a lot of people carry, especially newer people who are coming to the path, but also people who've been on it for a while, that kind of this fear that they're going to make a mistake. And most of the time in magic, you aren't really going to make a mistake. So it's a lot of times your own hesitation is what will get in the way. If you flub the words, if you have the wrong colored candle, if you forget things in ritual or in spell work, it's not gonna backfire on you or things like that. So we talk a lot about this in our Demystifying Witchcraft course. When we talk about magic and spell work, is like, what are ways that people can overcome these kind of fears. The challenge really with our self-doubt is it's going to keep us disconnected from our power. So when we're just sitting in the self-doubt all the time, we're not really fully stepping into our power, and that's going to be an issue for us. There can be fear of being wrong, like I said, of making a mistake that will undermine our confidence. And so one of the best things to do, it's like the best thing to do in anything when you're hesitating, is to just do it. So when I was first starting the business, I was afraid of all of this stuff, afraid of the tech, because I don't really consider myself a really great tech person. And I had a lot of good business mentors. I remember one of them said, start by starting. You just start. So same thing with your spellcraft, with your witchcraft, you just start doing it, and eventually you get better at it. But if we're constantly like second guessing ourselves, that's where some of our shadow work can aid us and can come from. So I think that the key to our to healing this aspect, the aspect of the doubting witch is starting small. So pulling one card a day and recording your results. So if you don't trust yourself as a reader or you don't trust your intuition, start there. Just pull a card, write down the results, write down what you get, and begin there. Begin with something small. Track synchronicities. So we doubt synchronicities. We might say that they're coincidence, or I'm reading too much into this. But if you actually track them and you record them and you see how many there actually are, it starts to the evidence begins to mount, right? And I have this my acupuncturist always says, is like, what's crazier? Is it crazy to believe all of these synchronicities have something to them? Or is it crazier to doubt all of these synchronicities in front of you? So if all of this stuff is in front of you and you're doubting, that's actually crazier than if we believe it, right? So whatever it takes us to get over and past that hump and really begin to step into our self-belief is going to be helpful. Do something in a regular daily practice. Light a candle, do some candle gazing, burn some incense, do some breath work, have some kind of small daily practice that you're doing, and you can learn through that how to build your confidence, right? Over time, your evidence is what is going to build your confidence, and that repetition is what's going to build your confidence. So here's a nice affirmation for anybody who's struggling kind of as that doubting witch. My gifts are real and they grow stronger the more I honor and use them. So my gifts are real and they grow stronger the more I honor and use them. And you can use that affirmation if you want to work, through this aspect of the witch wound, or you can make up one of your own. So kind of think about your own limiting beliefs when it comes to your abilities as a witch, and take that limiting belief and negate it and create an affirmation that you can use that's unique to you. So another archetype here is the isolated witch. So the isolated witch feels that they must walk this path alone. They long for community, but may fear being rejected or ridiculed. They don't share experiences even with safe people. So this kind of fear that suppresses us and isolates us is very powerful, and we can get into groups even like this one, and we can be afraid to share because it's just ingrained in us. And even when we perceive that the group is safe, we may still feel afraid to share. So I think the challenge for someone who is the isolated witch is that isolation reinforces the wound. So if we are isolating ourselves out of fear, or we're not trusting other people who are safe around us, it just compounds the wound and it compounds the isolation that we're feeling. So without reflection and support, our healing is going to be harder. So absolutely, you could do shadow work and all of this work on your own, but we know through research, there's actually research that backs this up, is that when you're working on something, people are more successful when they have support systems, when they have a group they can go to or someone they can go to and talk to and share these experiences. They tend to be more successful in whatever they're working on. So really think about that if you're somebody who is, is feeling that isolated witch wound. Seek out communities like ours. Start here. This is a very friendly and open group. And anybody watching this later back on YouTube who's not part of our Body Mind Witchcraft Body Mind Witchcraft Facebook group, we would love for you to join us and experience the community, or join our smaller Shadow Seekers membership and experience even more community. So I think that the keys to healing this isolated witch wound is creating communities where you feel safe, where you feel like you can share, sharing a small truth in trusted spaces to rebuild your trust. So think about it. So maybe you're not ready to be really out and open and you're working on this wound, but just try it. Share a little thing. If you're somebody who doesn't normally comment, comment. If you're somebody who doesn't normally post, post. see how it feels, right? Because I know at least in our group, you are going to be very well received. We don't judge here. We don't criticize. All people's experiences are worthy of sharing, and we can all learn something from each other, right? So let's talk about some pathways to healing the witch wound, and some of these will just sort of reiterate what we have already talked about, and then others might be a little bit newer. And then I'm going back to the chat. So Kurt said, do Reiki practitioners get judged this way? I am not a Reiki practitioner, so I won't be able to speak for everybody in that community, but I think that anybody on a pathway, like an alternative pathway like this, has been judged in some way, probably. So I would especially assume Reiki practitioners in certain parts of the country and world where these kind of practices are not as out in the open, might experience more judgment. But I think that anybody who's working, kind of, I always say like this is a pathway kind of off the beaten path. Anybody's kind of off that beaten path, off that main path that everybody else is taking, has that potential to be judged in some way. Sam said back in the 70s and 80s, we would call ourselves Wiccans as a mild way of saying we were witches, and the two words have changed meaning since then. I agree with Sam too. Like the word. And I came late 90s is when I came to the craft, mid to late 90s, and then like stepped into my power then. And even then, and into the early 2000s, I know that using the word Wiccan was softer sometimes than using the word witch. It's not as it doesn't have as much of the negative connotations. A lot of times people wouldn't even know what the word Wiccan meant. And so you would just say, oh, it's like an earth-based religion, and then they would just go on their way, right? As opposed to the word witch, which is definitely much more charged. But Sam's also right that the way that we use the words have changed since then as well. Jamie said, it's disturbing that my family is my biggest fear in a lot of aspects. I find when it comes to being really out and open, mine is too. It's so ingrained inside of us. That's where we grew up. We were in that container for so long, and it becomes so embedded and ingrained in our conscious and our unconscious, and so I think probably a lot of people relate to that. You're definitely not alone. Andrea says the doubting witch, she really resonates with that. So I'll get back to the comments in just a bit, but let me get through this last little bit here, and then we'll go into the chat again. So pathways to healing the witch wound. So step one is the recognition and the naming it. So that's what the episode is about today, is recognition. It's about normalizing it. This is, if you're experiencing any of this, I hope my goal with this episode is that you would know that you are not alone. So the wound is going to thrive in silence. It's going to thrive when we ignore it, just like any of our shadow wounds. And so naming it is going to be the first step in healing. So just saying, I have a witch wound that I'm going to be dealing with. That's the first step. So step two is reclaiming the history of this, right? So learning the stories of witches and healers and wise women, men, and people who have come before us. So reading about people in history. So Christopher Penczak's, I can't recommend his book enough, The Mighty Dead. He talks about different types of ancestors. And by the way, I'm going to talk about what we're going to be doing in next week's episode is about ancestral healing. So we'll get into this in more depth. But he talks about different types of ancestors. So there's the ancestors of our blood, but there's also the ancestors of the witch lineage. And so learning the stories of people like that can be a part of our own healing, but also learning the stories of your own ancestors. So even if people don't talk about them as being witches or call them witches, I know that I've picked up on stories of some of my dearly beloved ancestors who crossed through the veils, who people would say were, oh, she was very intuitive, or he always, had this knack at just the words that they would use. Nobody's saying that these are witches or magical practitioners, but I can read between the lines. I'm like, okay, that person had a connection to this aspect of spirituality that maybe others in the family didn't have. So learning about those stories, and if you, and especially if you have ancestors who the stories are out in the open, learning more about those. Honoring the resilience of those witches who came before us and not just their suffering, right? So that is about kind of learning and reclaiming the history. Then in step 3, this is the embodiment and the expression, and this is the work that we're going to do. So the practices. So if you find that it makes you anxious to even think about this, finding ways to ground and center yourself, finding that through breath work or through other grounding and centering practices. Activating your voice. Again, I said I was going to talk about signs in the body that you maybe experience the witch wound. So tight throat, especially when we are speaking, fear of expression. This can all be an aspect of our witch wound. Anxiety before sharing, especially the sharing of spiritual experiences, right? And feeling your energy kind of drop when you think about being seen. So like you have this, everyone has energy, right? And it ebbs and flows throughout the day, but maybe feeling a shift or a change in your energy when you are thinking about being out in the open with your spirituality or out in the open with your practices. So when we activate our voice, like all of that can create issues and blockages in the throat chakra. And when we activate the voice through chanting, singing, speaking our truth, affirmations like, I'm safe, I'm powerful, I'm a witch, just saying it over and over and over to yourself if you're having trouble with the word itself. All of this is going to activate your throat. And through activating your throat, you're going to start to change the energy in your body. And when we work with one chakra, we begin to affect the chakras on either side of it, and eventually this affects the entire energetic system. And then from there, step 4 is to come then into the more magical side of the practices. So maybe you want to create a protection talisman or charm or a sigil or something that helps you feel safer as you work through the witch wound. Or maybe a ritual. So a nice thought for a ritual would be a black candle to release your fears. Anything, like kind of doing your shadow work around like what's below the surface when I'm thinking about calling myself a witch or being out in the open or stepping into my gifts fully. What fears come up for you? What are the things that you want to release, and writing those down? Maybe creating a sigil around, maybe taking those fears and negating them by changing them into a positive affirmation, and then making a sigil around that, carving it into a black candle, and then lighting the candle and burning the paper to release your fears. And then having a white or a gold candle or any color that to you resonates your power as a witch, and then lighting that candle to really reclaim your power, and then allowing that to burn. You can then speak aloud, right, to activate your throat chakra. And you could say something like, I release the fear of being seen. I reclaim my voice, my magic, and my power. And you can use that one, or you can make up one that resonates more with you. And then step 5 is the community piece. So we've already talked about that, so I won't go into it much here, but sharing your truth in safe spaces like this one with like-minded people, both in person or online. And I know some of you guys are out there in places where you don't have people in person who share your beliefs, or you feel supported and seen in those groups. And so for you online, I mean, it's one of the main reasons that I created this group, is so that we would have a space for people who don't have those in-person connections. Those of you who are lucky enough to have those, find spaces where in-person witches also meet. But for those who don't, make good use of these online groups. I see baby Corey is walking around back there. Every time we gather like this in community, in groups, we are breaking the silence that keeps us separated and keeps the witch wound alive. So really think about that. Every time we gather, even on these lives, and we're here together, if we gather in ritual together, whether online or in person, in workshops, in the groups, we're breaking the silence of the witch wound. We're breaking the power that it holds over our communities, and we begin to heal. And when we heal ourselves, we heal the collective. Even if it's a little bit, the collective could use all the healing that it can get right now. So I'm going to now open it up. I'm going to go back to the chat, open it up for any more questions that people have. And then we'll talk a little bit about what is coming up. And like I said, if you feel like this is work that you want to do, shadow work around the witch wound, consider joining our Shadow Seekers membership if you're not already a member. We do deep dives into topics like this every month in Shadow Seekers. And then we also have replays of everything, so you can always revisit it. So we actually have a full length, I think it's like almost 2 hours long, a workshop on the witch wound. It goes into much greater detail than what we talked about tonight, with a lot of ideas for how people can begin to heal that aspect of themselves through their shadow work and through the practices that they do. So let me go back into the chat and see what is here. So Joanne said, my family knew me as a devout Christian, but when my life changed, I opened myself up and I'm growing in my power. She said, if they cannot accept me, that it is their problem and not a me. That's a them problem and not a me problem. And that is like, so that a statement like that is a sign of like such good work at this, being able to change the way that we might have felt about things, kind of understanding the root of our own work, and then beginning to shift that inside of us. Sam said, know that those who truly love you will get over the fear or anger in time. They may remain sad for you, but love will always overcome. He said, trust me, only those who never knew you as a free person anyway will reject you. Sad about them, but truly no real loss. And sometimes, I believe that my family truly loves me, and I think there's a lot of truth in that. But nevertheless, there is still can be a fearfulness for people in what would happen. Even families who love us might react in very negative ways, and that is what can keep some of us silenced. So hopefully through the work we find ways to overcome that, shift our views on it, like Joanne did, and but yeah, it's sad for those who cannot accept the true us, right? Absolutely. So Jamie said, my gifts are real and they grow stronger as I honor and use them. She said, for anyone who wants a screenshot, that one's a great affirmation. Absolutely. Kelly said, I'm avoidant by nature and it manifests as isolation for sure. She said, I'm grateful I can be open with my family, husband and kids, which is awesome to have a family that you can be open with. She said, but I'm incredibly private. She said, one of the only reasons I even have a Facebook page is for groups like this. She said, it's hidden from everyone I know in real life, and it's purely my private space to explore and learn about my interests. And she said, it's why I only have like 5 friends. And that's okay. Add more of the friends in Shadow Seekers and you'll have more friends. Add more of the members there. You'll have more friends on your Facebook. But I definitely relate to it. It can be a way that it's hard to be out there, especially if we are more avoidant by nature, and then even more avoidance will come when we perceive that there's like threats and things. And Sonia's here saying hi to you. Sam said we should always include among our ancestors our own past lives. Very good point. The people who have been, the lives we lived, we are also our own ancestors. Very, very good point. Absolutely. Kelly said, good advice, wonderful time to do this kind of work. Yeah, and that's what I was hoping to like have this. This is a time when we, the veils are thinner, right? As we move from Mabon, transitioning through the rest of autumn into Samhain season. And so it's a good time for us to talk about this, think about our ancestors, think about our past lives, do our shadow work. Um, Sam said, I accept myself into this group and treasure your companionship along the path. Thank you. And thank you for being here, Sam. And thank you for all of you guys. You make this group what it is by you guys being here and being you and helping each other and supporting each other. So let's talk about what is coming up. If you guys have any questions or comments, you can leave them in the chat as I talk about what's coming up. So on 10/7, so next week, we're going to do an episode on ancestral healing and magic. And so we will expand more on to how we can do some ancestral healing, especially if you find that there are some wounds and any ancestral trauma that you may be carrying. This, you'll learn what that is and what it would look like and how you can begin to heal that. I thought this very appropriate too as we're moving into Samhain season, or as we approach Samhain season. We're not there for another month yet, but I know as witches we get excited at this time of year. On 10/14, I am planning to do an episode from Boston where I'm going to be talking to my friend Tippy, who was a guest on our show back in January, and he is going to be sharing some of his encounters with spirits and ghosts. And he was telling me some of these stories, and so I'm really excited to be talking to him. I'm also going to share some of my own experiences, and we'll be, opening up for experiences from the audience as well. So that's going to be on 10/14. On 10/21, we're going to do an episode on working with the dark and the new moon, because we're going to be right at the dark new moon time. And then on 10/28, A Witch's Guide to Samhain, to prepare you as we enter Samhain season. Now, our Shadow Seekers membership that I've talked about a couple of times tonight, we are having a flash sale. It was supposed to open this week. It looks like it's really going to be coming next week for 3 days. So if you are, you hear us talking about it, you think it sounds good, watch your email. Or watch for, there will probably be a post in this group as well, and on our YouTube channel, so you can learn more about the membership, see if it's a good fit for you, and you can join us for that little sale, flash sale that's going on. I'm also going to put a link in the chat. This is for anybody who's not already on our mailing list. To sign up, you can get on the mailing list, and this way you will learn about everything that's coming up, different rituals that we might have, ways that you can join our coven or join the Shadow Seekers membership. And then as a bonus, you get sent the Witch's Guide to Shadowwork when you sign up. We never spam people, and you can always unsubscribe at any time. So check for that in the chat. If you're live here on Facebook, those of you back on YouTube watching this later, you will find it in the description of the video. Our Demystifying Witchcraft course is also going to be opening up sometime in October. We're getting ready for that. So that is a full course. Takes you through all of the foundations and fundamentals of witchcraft, from casting a circle to calling quarters to working with deities and elements and spell work, the sabbats, the wheel of the year, all of that. So watch for that coming as well. I'm going to go back to the chat to see if there's any final thoughts or questions. As Jamie said, I have more friends on Facebook than I have in real life. And what's funny too about that, like Beth was saying something the other day about in real life. And I said, well, this is real life, right? I know why people use it and why she was using it that way, but I'm like, this is real life. Like lots of things are changing. Honestly, when I first started, I became a high priestess and everything. I never imagined that I would have an online version of the coven, or I'd be doing so much work online. Obviously, the pandemic changed a lot. Our coven had to go online, and that's what kind of inspired me and gave me the ideas and the material to come on here and do this for more people. But to me, I have like I said, there's more people who know me as Aislin than as my birth name, and that has to do with all of these Facebook friends and these Facebook groups and being on YouTube and everything. So I would venture to say I probably have more friends here than I do in actual like physical in-person stuff. So Kurt said, is this different than regular mudras? Ida mudra is a hand gesture that calms the nervous system, balances feminine energy, and promotes the receptivity associated with the moon's energy. So the Ida mudra is a mudra. Ida is the feminine energy channel of the body. So we have the Ida and the Pingala, and the Ida is the feminine energy. And I always make a note that, right, this is not about female or male or anything like that, or gender or anything. It's just, these are just two energies in the body. And the Ida happens to be the one that is connected to the feminine side. So the Ida mudra is a mudra that can connect us to the Ida channel, which is the feminine energy channel in the body. Now, there are other ways that you can connect to the Ida channel. One easy way is through breathing in and out through the nostril, the left nostril. So you would close your right nostril up and breathe in and out through the left. So that will also connect you to the moon's energy and receptivity and some of the associations of the Ida channel. But the Ida mudra is a, so there's, when you say regular mudras, I don't know what that means. Mudras are just mudras, but that is a mudra, the Ida mudra. Good question. Okay, so I don't see anything else in the chat, so I'm going to sign off for tonight. But as always, wonderful to spend Tuesday evenings with you. And for those of you watching back on YouTube later, wonderful to have you in the replay as well. Make sure to subscribe to our Body, Mind, Witchcraft YouTube channel if you have not already, and then you will never miss a future episode. Check out The Witch's Guide to Shadowwork and sign up for our mailing list if you haven't already. Make sure to leave a heart or a thumbs up somewhere in the feed, and that will help us get this out to more people. And until next time, blessed be.